Welcome to the deep dive. You know, when we as adults decide we want to build character or try to understand these complex ethical dilemmas, we usually reach for incredibly dense philosophical texts.
Right. The really heavy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We wade through hundreds of pages of abstract theory, just trying to construct some sort of moral framework. But think about how you build that same foundation in a child.
Well, you certainly don't hand them a textbook.
No, you hand them a crayon, you give them what is essentially moral scaffolding, you know?
Yeah.
You build the entire framework of right and wrong, of courage and loyalty, using matching games, simple lines, and really straightforward stories.
It requires a masterful level of distillation, honestly.
Oh, totally.
Because taking these massive, ancient, and frankly, very complicated narratives and finding the absolute core of the lesson without losing the gravity of the story itself, that is not easy.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are looking at a specific piece of source material that, it executes this beautifully.
Yeah, it really does.
It's a children's coloring and activity book called Faithful Friends of the Bible. It's written by Reverend Dr. Antonio Arnold, who operates as an author, a pastor, and a teacher.
Which really informs the whole approach of the book.
Right. And we're going to unpack how this seemingly simple book takes some of the most famous high-stakes stories in human history and basically translates them into potent, digestible lessons for a young audience.
And the author's stated intent right out of the gate, it just sets the tone for everything that follows. Like in the dedication, Rev. Dr. Arnold writes that the goal is to plant seeds of courage, kindness, and devotion that grow for a lifetime.
Wow, yeah.
He's addressing the children, naturally, but he's also speaking directly to the parents and caregivers who are guiding them. So we are analyzing a tool that is deliberately designed to shape a worldview from the ground up.
Well, let's start by unpacking the very first word in the book's title, which is friends. Because the baseline we are establishing here, it kind of redefines what friendship actually means to a developing mind.
Oh, absolutely. It's not the modern casual definition.
No, not at all. Because in this book, friendship is not just about, sharing toys or hanging out on the playground. It is portrayed as an act of profound loyalty and often incredible personal risk.
The stakes are incredibly high. The
Yeah.
first major example the book uses to illustrate this is the relationship between Jonathan and David.
Right. And to give you some context, if you aren't familiar with the historical backdrop, Jonathan is a literal prince. He is the son of King Saul.
Yeah, and his father, to put it mildly, views David as a massive threat to his throne.
A huge threat. But Jonathan sees David's bravery, he sees his faith, and the book specifically highlights this moment where Jonathan takes off his own royal robe and his sword and just gives them to David.
He even goes out of his way to warn David
Yeah.
when his father is plotting to take his life.
Yeah. And how does the book handle that for kids?
Well, it uses an interactive activity sheet. It's called Draw Natch to process this moment. It asks a child to draw a physical line between Jonathan's action, so handing over the robe and sword, and what that action actually represents.
Which is what? Exactly.
Choosing friendship over fear and showing unconditional support.
I have to push back a little on how simple that looks on the activity page, though.
Okay, how so?
Well, when Jonathan the Crown Prince hands over his royal robe and his weapon to David, isn't he essentially handing over his royal inheritance?
That's exactly what he's doing, yeah.
Right. He is actively recognizing that David is going to be the next king, not him.
Yeah.
That completely changes the parameters of what it means to be a best friend. You're not just giving up a jacket, you're giving up a kingdom.
The historical gravity of that moment is immense. And you're touching on why the book's methodology is so clever, really.
How do you mean?
Well, in the ancient Near East, royal succession was often a brutal, bloody affair. By having the child focus on the tangible items, the robe and the sword, the book anchors the abstract concept of sacrifice to objects a child can actually understand.
Oh, that makes sense.
It simplifies the action, but it preserves the underlying tension. And we see this exact same theme of profound sacrificial loyalty in the story of Ruth and Naomi.
Yes. The book features this beautifully detailed illustration of Ruth supporting Naomi, and it's accompanied by that famous quote from Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. "For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge."
And the narrative expands beyond just Ruth's loyalty, too. It introduces Boaz.
Right, the owner of the field where Ruth is laboring, basically just gathering leftover grain to keep her and her mother-in-law from starving.
Exactly. And the book brings back that tactile draw and match activity here. Children are asked to match Boaz's actions like instructing his workers to ensure Ruth's safety and deliberately leaving extra grain for her to take home.
And they match that with concepts like generosity and protection, right?
Yes.
There's just something fascinating about the physical act of doing that. You are drawing a line with your crayon from a picture of a basket of grain directly to a picture of a heart.
It's powerful.
It really is. It physically connects a totally mundane action to a profound morality.
And cognitive science actually backs up why that works so well.
Wait, really?
Yeah, when you associate a physical motor function like drawing a line with a conceptual idea, you are creating a stronger memory imprint.
Oh, wow.
It moves ethics from an abstract lecture into a concrete action. And Boaz eventually marries Ruth, and the book points out a fascinating historical lineage detail for the reader. Boaz becomes the great-grandfather of King David.
Which brings us perfectly back to David, much later in his life when he is finally on the throne.
Yes, the story of King David and Mephibosheth.
Right. So Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son, which makes him the grandson of the former King Saul. And he has a physical disability, he can't walk, and he is living in exile.
But David remembers that ancient promise he made to his old friend Jonathan.
He does. He brings Mephibosheth out of hiding, invites him to live in the royal palace, and insists he eat at his table like family.
And to understand the weight of that, you really have to look at how new monarchs typically operated in the ancient world.
They usually just wiped everyone out, right?
Exactly. A newly crowned king would systematically eliminate every single remaining family member of the previous dynasty just to prevent any future rebellions.
But David does the exact opposite. He shows radical mercy.
Right. The book frames this entire sequence as kindness from a king, teaching the reader that keeping your promises, especially to the vulnerable, is the ultimate flex of true strength.
So once a child understands that true friends will protect them and keep their promises, the natural next question you have to ask is, well, what happens when those friends aren't there?
When you're totally alone.
Exactly. What happens when you have to face a massive threat completely by yourself? The narrative transitions into stories of individuals facing overwhelming obstacles, like literal and figurative giants.
And the quintessential story utilized here is, of course, David versus Goliath.
Naturally. And David isn't a seasoned warrior at this point. He's just a young shepherd. The coloring page depicts this massive, heavily armored giant. And then there's David, just standing there with a leather sling and 5 smooth stones.
And the book emphasizes that his courage wasn't rooted in traditional weapons or armor, He was armed with his faith.
He fundamentally believed his God was bigger than the giant standing in front of him.
Yeah. But the thematic brilliance of this section is how it balances the representation of courage. It doesn't rely solely on the physical battlefield bravery of David.
Oh, this is such a good point.
It places female figures on the exact same footing, demonstrating to the child that leadership and bravery, they take many different forms.
Like Esther. Let's look at Esther. The coloring page for Esther shows her standing before the king of the Persian Empire. She isn't holding a sword or a shield, right? She is holding a scroll.
Stepping up to save her people from a literal genocide.
Yes, anchored by that incredible phrase, for such a time as this.
And think about the question that poses to the listener. What does bravery actually look like? For David, it was facing immediate physical danger in a valley. But for Esther, leadership looks like high-stakes political bravery. It is diplomacy. It's risking your life by breaking protocol to speak truth to power in a throne room.
I just find the contrast in their respective weapons to be such a smart teaching tool. David is armed with a physical stone. Esther is armed with a scroll, a petition, and her own voice.
It shows you that courage requires different tools depending on the room you're standing in.
Exactly. You don't always need a sword to slay a giant.
No, you don't. And then the book introduces Deborah, a figure who essentially bridges both of those distinct worlds.
Deborah is such a fascinating inclusion here. The text specifically calls her out with 3 distinct titles. She's a prophetess, a judge, and a warrior.
And the source material pulls from Judges chapters 4 and 5. To give you the stakes, the Israelites are being ruthlessly oppressed by a commander named Sisera.
Who is terrifying.
Terrifying. Sisera controls an army equipped with 900 iron chariots. And in the ancient world, an iron chariot was basically the equivalent of a modern military tank.
Wow, yeah, so it was an overwhelming, terrifying technological advantage.
Absolutely. So Deborah summons a military commander named Barak and tells him it is time to fight back.
But Barak hesitates, right? He says he will only lead the army if she goes with him.
Yeah. And she does not blink. She goes to the front lines and leads Israel to victory.
The visual dynamic in the illustrations for Deborah is just striking. You have her in one panel sitting peacefully under a palm tree, settling disputes as a judge.
And then in another panel,
She is on horseback, holding a sword, leading an army into combat. It visually communicates to a child that you can be profoundly wise and thoughtful while also being fierce and strategic.
it offers a deeply holistic view of leadership. The book explicitly quotes Judges 5, where Deborah refers to herself as a mother in Israel.
I love that.
It completely redesigns the concept of motherhood and nurturing to include fierce, tactical protection and military strategy against an existential threat.
You know, you might be thinking that facing down an iron chariot or a hostile king is the pinnacle of bravery. But there is a totally different kind of giant the book tackles next.
The internal ones.
Yes, we move from external enemies to internal ones. The narrative shifts into stories of betrayal, forgiveness, and the bold transformation of deeply held beliefs.
The emotional intelligence of the book is arguably at its peak here, like when it introduces the Old Testament narrative of Joseph.
The themes here are incredibly heavy. Joseph is betrayed by his own brothers purely out of jealousy over his father's favoritism and, his special robe.
Right.
And the text notes he was sold to Midianite or Ishmaelite merchants for 20 pieces of silver and taken down to Egypt. We are talking about familial betrayal resulting in literal human trafficking.
And the book does not attempt to sanitize those dark realities. It shows Joseph in chains,
It does.
but it carefully traces his rise through the Egyptian political ranks, how Pharaoh eventually puts his own signet ring on Joseph's hand, drapes him in fine linen and a gold chain, and gives him a chariot.
Making him second in command over the entire empire.
Exactly.
And Joseph uses that immense administrative power to store grain and save the region during a massive 7-year famine. But I have to challenge the methodology here a bit when it comes to presenting this to a child.
Okay, how so?
Well, in the matching game for Joseph, the book asks the child to draw a line connecting the phrase, Joseph forgave his brothers, to the concept of showed mercy and grace.
Right.
I mean, connecting 2 dots with a blue crayon makes forgiveness seem like a simple afternoon chore. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own flesh and blood. Asking a child to wrap their head around that level of grace seems almost impossibly reductive.
I see what you're saying. It seems reductive to an adult who understands the nuances of PTSD and trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
But developmentally, if you hand a 5-year-old the full psychological weight of trauma recovery, you risk paralyzing their capacity for empathy. They just can't process the mechanics of the recovery.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, the book intentionally isolates the outcome. It acknowledges the initial hurt. I mean, the illustration clearly shows his brothers looking angry and jealous, but the resolution focuses entirely on a picture of Joseph embracing his brother.
It teaches the foundational concept, basically.
Right, that while betrayal is an unfortunate reality of the human experience, the ultimate victory is not revenge. The ultimate victory is reconciliation, using your acquired wisdom and power to save the very people who hurt you.
Framing it as isolating the outcome makes total sense. And that theme of internal shifting ties perfectly into the other major transformation story in the book, which is the Apostle Paul.
Paul's story represents the ultimate pivot in worldview.
Oh, for sure. The book explicitly notes that Paul was initially someone who actively persecuted the followers of Jesus, but he transforms into this completely dedicated, bold messenger.
And the interactive elements designed for Paul's story are incredibly clever.
Yeah, there is a mission map template showing the Mediterranean world, places like Antioch, Ephesus, Rome, and Jerusalem, and it comes with a sticker sheet of mission symbols.
Right, you've got little scrolls representing teaching, boats for traveling, hearts for loving others, and footprints.
It's so tactile. By utilizing a map and physical stickers, the book turns an abstract spiritual and intellectual journey into a tangible geographic adventure.
It tells the child that transformation is not just something that happens quietly in your head. It involves your hands, your feet, where you choose to go, and how you physically treat people when you get there.
It even asks the child to write down one specific way they can be a bold messenger today, which really bridges the gap between the ancient Mediterranean world and their immediate everyday reality.
It really does.
You know, when you look at the roster we have built so far, it reads like a superhero team. We have warrior kings, brave queens stepping into throne rooms, and global missionaries traveling by boat.
Yeah, it's a very loud, dramatic lineup.
It is. But the book makes a highly deliberate, really unexpected choice for its final thematic section. It pivots away from the dramatic, world-changing actions and focuses entirely on the quiet protectors and the servant leaders.
This represents perhaps the most subversive lesson in the entire curriculum. It completely upends conventional definitions of ultimate strength.
Right. It introduces Joseph from the New Testament, the earthly father of Jesus.
Talk about a figure who operates entirely in the background. The book describes him as a just man, a carpenter, and a quiet protector.
The defining characteristic of Joseph's portrayal in the biblical text, which the coloring book perfectly captures, is his silence.
He does not have a single recorded word in all of Scripture.
Wait, really? Not one?
Not one line of dialogue. No speeches, no proclamations.
It is incredible that the text gives him zero dialogue, yet he's the one chosen for the monumental task of physically protecting the savior of the world. It just strips away the idea that you need to be a great orator or a loud presence to be a great leader.
Because his actions are entirely pivotal. He obeys the angel's warning in a dream to immediately uproot his family and flee as refugees to Egypt to save the baby Jesus from King Herod's wrath.
And the coloring page shows him working with his carpenter's tools, and another shows him leading Mary and the baby on a donkey. His strength is located purely in his immediate obedience and his steadfast integrity as a provider.
And that exact brand of quiet, resolute strength is mirrored in Mary, too.
Yeah, when the angel Gabriel tells her she will be the mother of Jesus, her courage is found in a simple, deeply risky yes. She didn't run away. She stayed close to Jesus through his entire harrowing journey.
Which naturally brings the narrative to how the book portrays Jesus himself.
Right.
It certainly mentions the dramatic moments, the miracles, the feeding of the hungry masses. But the central anchoring image of Jesus' leadership in this book is him kneeling down on the floor with a basin of water, washing the dirt off his disciples' feet.
That is the ultimate pivot I'm talking about. Think about the psychological journey of the child reading this. You take a child who has just colored in a king sitting on a throne and a warrior leading an army with a sword, and then you say, actually, the ultimate hero of the story, the savior of the world, is the one kneeling in the dirt washing feet.
It fundamentally shifts their understanding of heroism from defeating the bad guys to caring for the vulnerable.
Exactly.
And we see that specific definition of heroism reinforced with the inclusion of the Good Samaritan story. The activity asks children to reflect on loving their neighbor through service and empathy.
Explicitly defining compassion as an action you take, not just a sympathetic feeling you have.
Yes, it shifts the spotlight to the people doing the unseen work.
Which brings us to a specific group of people highlighted in the book that I like to call the encouragers. These are the people who weren't necessarily the main character of the era, but they made everything else possible.
Like Nehemiah, he's described as a rebuilder and a prayerful leader.
Right, he successfully rebuilt the ruined walls of Jerusalem while facing immense political and physical opposition.
But the book highlights that his primary tool was his prayerful leadership. And then there's Hannah, categorized specifically as a prayer warrior who earnestly prayed for her son Samuel and then courageously dedicated him to a life of service.
But my personal favorite in this category is Barnabas. The book refers to him as an encourager and mission partner.
Okay, why is he your favorite?
Because when you look at what Barnabas actually does, he is the ultimate hype man.
The hype man. That is a very modern lens for a biblical figure, but how so?
Well, think about the dynamic. Paul is out there being the loud, bold messenger, writing letters and getting all the historical attention.
Right.
But the book makes sure to point out that it was Barnabas who first introduced Paul to the apostles in Jerusalem when everyone else was absolutely terrified of him because of his past.
Oh, that's true.
And later on, Barnabas is the one who stands up for a younger guy named John Mark to make sure he gets a second chance after a failure.
Yeah, he really does advocate for people.
Barnabas is the ancient equivalent of that incredibly supportive coworker or friend who operates entirely behind the scenes to make sure everyone feels encouraged and absolutely no one gets left behind.
Framing him as a hype man is actually a very accurate translation of his role. And it validates the child who might be reading this book, who doesn't naturally see themselves as the loud leader holding the scroll or the bold warrior holding the sword.
Exactly.
It tells them that there is immense structural value in being the encourager, the builder, the one who quietly supports the team.
So let's pull all of these threads together. Faithful Friends of the Bible is utilizing the seemingly simple, almost rudimentary medium of a children's coloring book to tackle some of the most complex, heavy human themes imaginable.
It really covers a staggering amount of ground.
It does. We are talking about the deeply sacrificial nature of true friendship. We are talking about how to face down terrifying giants, whether those giants require a smooth stone or a diplomatic scroll.
We're looking at the grueling emotional work of forgiving the unforgivable, too.
Yes, and recognizing the profound, world-altering heroism in everyday, quiet protectors.
It achieves exactly what the author set out to do in that opening dedication. It plants seeds.
It really does.
By breaking down these massive historical narratives into actionable virtues, like forcing a child to physically match a drawing of bread to the word generosity, or putting a sticker of a boat on a map to represent sharing love. It makes ancient wisdom incredibly immediate and practical.
And that leads me to a final thought I want you to mull over today. Think about the purely physical act of using a coloring book.
All right?
You and I live in a world where we are constantly swiping, tapping, and scrolling past infinite amounts of digital information at lightning speed.
Oh, constantly. It's overwhelming.
But a coloring book forces a child to slow down. They have to grip the crayon. They have to focus on the friction of the paper and staying within the lines. They physically draw the connections between a hero's action and a moral virtue.
The book even has them pick up a pen and physically sign a friendship pledge at the very end.
Exactly. So does the tactile, interactive nature of this book create a deeper, more permanent cognitive imprint of these virtues than just passively reading a text or watching a video?
That's a great question.
And if that is true, how could you, as an adult, apply that kind of slow, tactile learning to your own life? The next time you are trying to master a complex moral issue or understand a dense historical subject, maybe you shouldn't just be skimming articles on your phone.
Probably not.
Maybe we all need to find a way to get back to building our own moral scaffolding, brick by brick, or, crayon by crayon.